So if you're just a guy who works at a retail shop in Toronto selling
Mhm.
pre-rolls or whatever, and you want to come visit your cousin who lives in Detroit, they wouldn't let you in if you told them what your job was.
Right.
Hello, and welcome to A Higher Law, the cannabis podcast from the Dykema law firm. I'll be your host today, Brett Gelbord. I'm a partner at Dykema and a member of the firm's cannabis group. For more episodes, you can find us at dykemapodcast.com, youtube.com/Dykema Law, or by searching A Higher Law wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we'll be talking about immigration and how those concerns may impact your business in the cannabis space. And to talk to me about that, I've got my partner, Jim Aldrich, who's head of Dykema's immigration law practice. Jim, thank you for joining us today. You want to take a moment to let everybody know what you do?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Brett. Appreciate your time. As part of our immigration practice, we mainly focus on business-related immigration. We help clients bring people into the U.S., help them get visas to either attend meetings here in the U.S. or longer-term visas to either allow them to live and work in the U.S., or to get green cards, permanent residents, so they can remain here permanently. Um, our services kind of run the gamut from entry-level positions to those with what are called extraordinary ability aliens who, are really have risen to the top of their field. So we provide all sorts of immigration and immigration-related services. We assist with mergers and acquisitions during due diligence. We help with other areas of the law as well.
Right. So I guess it sounds like you'll have a client who says, "Hey Jim, we have an opening for, let's say, an executive in our
Mhm,
business, and the opening's in Alabama,
mhm.
and we're looking at a candidate who lives in India. Can you help us get that person over here?" That kind of.
Yep, that's exactly what we do.
So I assume that because there are still some very strict federal prohibitions on the cannabis business, and because immigration at the level that you're talking about deals directly with the federal government, that there might be some challenges, if not outright barriers, to doing what you do for businesses in the cannabis space.
That's correct. Even though more and more states are legalizing cannabis, marijuana use, it's still a controlled substance under federal law. Immigration Service applies federal law, does not apply state laws. So it involvement in the cannabis industry can cause significant difficulties with entering the U.S. or remaining here if you're a foreign national.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I suppose as part of the process, you have to disclose to the immigration service exactly what the business is that the person is coming here to do.
That's correct. On a given application, you describe the job the person's going to be doing, their qualifications, and the business. You
Okay.
don't have to go into great detail on the business, but if you don't disclose it and they figure it out,
Yeah.
then you can have some significant issues.
So just indicating that a person is a master botanist and they're coming to run an indoor agricultural operation probably wouldn't cut it.
They they would probably issue what's called a request for evidence, asking for more information and or confirmation that it's not in the cannabis industry.
Okay. Oh, do you think they would ask something as specific as that it's not in the cannabis industry?
I've heard of them doing that
Huh.
because, you know, you have to be very specific of and to avoid that. And maybe brochures about your company showing, hey, we do flowers, we do produce, that sort of thing, but we do not do it. And, a clear statement, we do not engage in the cannabis industry would probably be helpful too.
Right, right, right. So I'm guessing that this applies kind of across the board, right? Because I've spoken to people, on one end of the kind of labor spectrum who, were looking at buying an outdoor grow operation and wanted to use migrant farmers coming up
Yeah.
from Mexico and
Right.
other spots in Latin America. And I've also spoken to people who want to hire an executive from the UK to be their CFO.
Mhm.
And so, presumably it doesn't matter whether you're talking about white collar or blue collar or outdoor work or computer
No,
work. Yeah.
no, if it fits under either, kink involvement in a controlled substance industry
Yeah.
or trafficking in that, that can be very difficult.
And what are the kind of consequences if let's talk about that example of say a CFO from the UK.
Yeah.
So let's say, the business doesn't realize that this is going to be an issue. They go through the whole process of negotiating an agreement with this person to come and be their CFO. The person gets on a plane, they get to the airport, and they're going through customs in the States. And the customs officer says, "What are you here for?"
Yeah.
He says, "Oh, I'm starting a job. I'm working at, ABC Cannabis Company."
Yeah.
I mean, what happens to that person?
Well, the officer will tell him, I hope you've enjoyed your stay in the US, and put him on the next plane back.
Okay.
So, immigration is an administrative process. So it's very, very, very unusual for somebody to get charged criminally because number one, the federal government really isn't charging that many people with involvement in the cannabis industry.
Mhm.
Um, so the person would be most likely detained until the next flight back to their home country. The bad thing about that is sometimes it could be a few hours. You grab your luggage, you get on the next plane, you're home. But if the next flight home isn't, say the next day,
Yeah.
they hold you in custody. And
Oh,
many airports don't have holding facilities, so they take you to the county jail.
oh, wow.
So, so, so it's good to get those ducks in a row before you
Y-
head
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. That's probably not the five-star accommodations the UK CFO is accustomed to.
Let's hope not.
Right. Right. Yeah. You're hired another kind of problem. Um, but okay. So, and then are there any long-term consequences for that? Is that person going to be barred from coming to the States at
They,
all? Or
they could be because the statutes say that anybody who engages in the trafficking of a controlled substance is inadmissible. Um, if they're applying for an immigrant visa after this, say they get barred from the U.S. Afterwards, say a year later, they're applying for with another company and they're not going to engage the cannabis industry. They're still subject to being inadmissible, so they have to file often a waiver application. And those are applicable to those, again, coming over for short-term working visas, H-1Bs, Ls, that sort of thing. However, there's no waiver for immigrant visas. So it's difficult for them to stay long-term.
Hmm. And what about for the company? So this UK CFO says, "I'm here to work for ABC Cannabis Company."
Mhm.
Does that get, put in a record somewhere? And then does ABC Cannabis Company get a call from the federal government saying, "Hey, like, what are you doing?"
No, not normally. It usually only affects the person trying to come into the U.S. Immigration doesn't really take an interest in the operating of a cannabis company, except to the extent that it affects visa applications and foreign nationals coming in.
Okay. Now, what if you have a situation where a person has been coming in and out of the States and maybe not being honest with the customs folks about their
Mhm.
purposes for their
Yeah.
visits,
Mhm.
and for some reason, it comes out at one of their entry points why they're coming into the States? Like, is that going to exacerbate the problem for that person?
It would because number one, they'll be inadmissible because of the cannabis involvement. But number two, the officers can determine they've committed fraud by not, and especially if they've been asked specifically, "What are you coming in to do?"
Right.
And they can be found to have committed fraud, and they can be barred from the U.S. Sometimes permanently, often at least 10 years. So,
Wow. Okay.
mhm,
And now, this is in my mind, we're talking about someone coming to work for a company that is a plant touching company, right? A
mhm,
company growing
mhm,
cannabis or processing or has a
yeah,
retail operation or is vertically integrated or some combination of those. But there is a huge part of the cannabis industry that is grow lights, computer software,
mhm,
irrigation systems, fertilizer. Even Scott's like has like a
mhm,
subdivision that's a fertilizer company. They may have spun off, but it started with
yeah,
Scott. So you have
mhm,
all these businesses that support this industry that
mhm,
don't directly work with the plant that's federally
right,
legal. There's even like state licensed credit unions that
right,
focus on serving this industry. And
right.
so if one of those companies wanted to bring someone into work, would they still be prohibited from doing that?
It would be difficult, but probably not impossible.
Okay.
Because the trafficking is defined as cultivating, producing, manufacturing, distributing, selling, financing, or transporting
Okay.
a controlled substance. So an officer could say, well, that's involved with the manufacture of it. If you have the grow lights, for example.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, um, and I have heard of people getting denied visas to come over to work for a kind of a computer service networking company where one of their clients is in the cannabis industry. So it is possible. In cases like that, it often depends on the officer reviewing the application.
Okay.
And even though it may get approved once, it doesn't mean the person would be able to file to get an extension to stay here longer. So
Right. And then I guess so it sounds like it's best for obviously companies that are plant touching need to be looking domestically for their workforce, whether it's from the boots on the ground, rank and file employee up to your top executives. Those need to be domestic
right.
people. For ancillary markets, it sounds like there's a chance you might be able to get someone international if they were really perfect for you and that's who you wanted. But is the juice worth the squeeze there? I mean, how much does it cost to like try and get someone in when there's like maybe a hurdle?
Well, it depends on the type of visa because there are different requirements for different. If you're transferring an executive, say to Scott's, just as an example,
Yeah.
where maybe a small part of their business is the fertilizer for the cannabis industry, I think it'd be easier for them, well-known large company, than it would be for a smaller company where that's the only fertilizer product they make.
Right.
So it always just depends on the circumstances. The
Yeah.
Immigration Service is a non-precedent setting organization generally. So they take the position just because we approve this once doesn't mean we'll approve it again.
Yeah. Yeah. So you could wind up like spending a lot of time and money trying to get a person in.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it might not work out.
Right. That's correct.
Yeah.
And another aspect is even if they're engaged in the cannabis industry, say up in Canada, and they're coming into the US to engage in something non-cannabis related, they can still be barred because the trafficking statute says any involvement. It doesn't say just in the US. So they can, and I've read of cases where somebody coming in from Canada in the cannabis industry wasn't allowed into the US.
I mean, so like if you're just a guy who works at a retail shop in Toronto selling pre-rolls or whatever, and you want to come visit your cousin who lives in Detroit, you might not be able, they wouldn't let you in if you told them what your job was.
Right. Yeah. Now, often, I'm here in the Detroit area and, people come across the bridge or the tunnel every day and they're not often asked what they do in Canada if they're just coming in, say for dinner or for a short trip.
Right.
But people who go through the actual visa application process have to provide a lot more information.
Okay. That makes sense. All right. I guess, looking forward, there's a lot of news about rescheduling cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 on the Controlled Substances Act. There's some folks who think that might happen in the next year. There's some folks who think that even if it happens, for the administrative process, they could take years. So who knows if it's going to happen or when. But if that were to happen, I mean, it's still a controlled substance. And so, but I suppose you could be, so you'd still have your state, in theory, you'd still have your state cannabis programs where you have some, company that's vertically integrated and doing, soup to nuts growing to selling to customers. But then when it moves to Schedule 3, you might then have other companies that are maybe more in the pharmaceutical space that are working with the FDA to develop, actual, sort of federally regulated pharmaceutical cannabis. So if a person were to come to work after that happened, it would make a difference if they were going to go for one of those versus the other.
Well, the trafficking statute says if it's a controlled substance. So if it's on any of the schedules, that defines a controlled substance, then they're going to have difficulty. If it's something where the FDA is specifically involved, that would probably help.
Yeah.
Or specifically authorized this research project or product development. But because in general, I think until it's off the controlled substance lists, it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, I have to imagine that like the big pharmaceutical companies that make controlled substances for use, like they must be able to bring in executives from overseas, right?
I think they're. I don't know this, but I would imagine they're specifically licensed by the feds to engage in that.
Okay,
So,
that makes sense. Okay, yeah. So anyway, the short answer is if you're still a state legal market
Mhm.
operator, rescheduling is not going to help you with this immigration issue.
No,
Yeah.
I think it would have to be legalized or at least decriminalized,
Right.
and then removed from the schedules.
Yeah. Huh, okay. Well, um, is there anything else that you think is important for people in the space to know?
Just if you're going to be involved and considering hiring foreign nationals, just be very prepared that they could get denied their visas and or not admitted to the U.S.
Right.
Um, Now, once a person gets a green card, they can engage in this because they won't get their green card yanked because they engage in this. But some green card holders also want to become citizens,
Yeah.
and if the naturalization process requires a person to have good moral character, and the Immigration Service still considers a person in the cannabis industry to be committing a crime, so that would negate the person's good moral character in their eyes.
Interesting. Okay.
So so you won't necessarily lose your green card if you do engage in it, but you wouldn't be able to become a citizen if you do.
Okay. Is a green card a permanent?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
they can remain here permanently. They can live, they can work, but they're not citizens, so they can't vote, among other things.
Okay. Wow. Well, I mean, let's hope for all these reasons, on top of all the other reasons, that we get some federal some federal relief here, because
Yeah,
there's a lot
and
of people who I'm sure would like to work and a lot of businesses that would like to hire. So
yeah, and I read that Joe Biden mentioned something about dropping it, like you mentioned earlier,
yeah,
changing the schedule, and I have seen Donald Trump talk about uh, marijuana on the state level,
yeah,
but I have not heard either of them. Well, I guess it'd be Kamala Harris now, but talk
yeah.
about decriminalizing it or taking it off the controlled substance
Yeah,
list.
there's been a litany of bills introduced in both chambers at on the
Mhm.
federal level, and they go varying degrees of nowhere.
Right.
And they're still pending, and people who watch the space are, I think, not really too optimistic about their prospects at this point, and we'll just have to see what happens with
Mhm.
the election, I guess. So, yeah,
Yeah, and then of course then it's still got to get through Congress, and as we've seen, not much does.
no, no, not much, not much done. Just like not many people working in the cannabis space should get through customs. So,
Right? Yeah.
well, on that note, I think that's it for us today.
Great.
Thank you for joining, and thank you, Jim, for being here. And here's just a reminder that you can find us by searching A Higher Law wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Brett Gelbord. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next time on A Higher Law.